What was the cause of the Herero uprising?
But really, when it comes to the causes, there are other countries grabbing for Africa. Germany wants their piece of it too. And you kind of have to think of it as, in current terms. So the Germans show up. There's only a few. They kind of settle on the outskirts of their civilization. So we're like, okay, this is kind of strange, but nothing's happening yet.
The Herero lived in Nambia, southwest Africa.
Another important thing to realize is that most African cultures don't believe in land ownership. So they believe that their tribe, so the Herero believe that this giant chunk of land belongs to our people, but they don't necessarily have households and their own private plots of land and things like that. Which, of course, in Germany or in Europe, that's the measure of your wealth. How big your house is, how many possessions you have, things like that. For the Herero, it's more about cattle, how much cattle you have. So the European ideals and way of life kind of start to conflict with the Herero now that there are more and more Germans coming to Africa. So that kind of creates a strain. On top of that, so as more and more Germans start to arrive, again, they feel they're superior. So they start to seize, of course, the land. Then they start to take cattle from the Herero. That's their way of life. They raise the cattle, they can sell them, not for money, but in traditional sense. So now they don't have their possessions anymore. It'd be like someone coming and taking your house and your car and being like, yep, you can figure it out, you'll be fine. Which, you probably wouldn't be. So, so this starts to become an issue because now the Herero have to kind of conform to a traditional idea of money. So they're not used to paying for things. They'll barter. Of course, they get most of their food and things from the land, but now they don't have their cattle, so they don't really have that anymore. So a lot of the Herero also start to slip into kind of the traditional European idea of debt because they don't have money, which is what the Germans want. So they really end up essentially being slaves to the Germans because they have to now work to eat. They have to go to stores and all the infrastructure that the Germans have set up, but they don't have money or things like that. So they end up really essentially working for nothing on their own cattle that don't even belong to them anymore. So you can imagine you'd probably be bitter. So all of that building up is really what causes that tension and the uprising. Essentially, just like anyone, you get pissed off, you want your stuff back. And so it's radical. It's not just someone taking your stuff, it's just trying to change your entire way of life. And it'll sound a little bit familiar to the Holocaust too, because the Germans do start to set up concentration camps to put the Herero in. So they're really doing hard labor now. So it's really just a radically different way of life being forced upon them. They haven't had that opportunity to kind of modernize like most people have. So that's really where the trouble comes in and where the uprising begins.
Why did the Herero people want to exterminate all white Germans, excluding the English?
Of course, kind of what I just explained. There's really no English in the Herero lands at this point. Most of the Europeans, even though it's kind of a barbaric way, we're saying, we're just going to go to another country and take a piece of it. They're kind of respectful of each other. So the Germans know this is our part, we'll stay here. The English, this is our section, we'll stay here. So it's really just the Germans that are with the Herero at this point. So it's not so much that they're only picking the Germans, that's just who's there. And African warfare and thought is a little bit different than the European idea. They really just want to fight with whomever's bothering them. They don't necessarily have this idea of we'll go conquer, this other area. It's just like, hey man, leave us alone, get out of our area. We'll have a little battle here to push you off a little bit. So that's really the issue with the Germans is, that's just who's there and who's bothering them. The Germans just wanted what they felt they were entitled to. The English did things a little bit differently. Of course, they end up having uprisings, and the English also lose a lot of their territories. But in Botswana, which is just a country away, the English set it up as a protectorate. So they basically just wanted to keep it as is. To them, they have the land, so they have the power. But they didn't quite settle it the way that the Germans did in Namibia. They just set up a police force and basically tried to keep everyone else out. They wanted to keep the Dutch in South Africa away from Botswana, and they wanted to keep the Germans over in their